Good evening, viewers. Welcome to your Wealth, a show where we break down businesses, economy, and everything that is in between that affects your money and your future. Tonight, we focus on the numbers making headlines. Zimbabwe's inflation rate has surged again. Now, this is according to Zimstat. The ZiG inflation rate jumped to a staggering 92.1% in May 2025, up from 85% in April, while the month-on-month rate remains relatively low at 0.9%. It's the year-on-year trend that is raising eyebrows across boardrooms, market stalls, and household alike. But what do these figures really mean for the average Zimbabwean, the person who owns a small business, and the overall economy that was projected to grow by 6% this year? Are we still on track, or are we drifting off course? Now, joining me in the studio today to unpack all of this is Dr. Zach Murerwa, an economist who's going to be helping us to see how these numbers are going to affect us and what they mean to an average Zimbabwean. Good evening, Doctor.
Good evening to you. Good evening, listeners.
Awesome. Let me get straight into my questions, Doctor. You know, with the ZiG year-on-year inflation rate now at 92.1%, how sustainable is the country's reliance on the ZiG compared to the USD day-to-day transaction, especially for small businesses and informal traders?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I think what is critical is for people to understand what those statistics mean. I think the first thing is to define the differences between year-on-year inflation and month-on-month inflation. Figures read on face value might be misleading. You have to, I think we need to take you back to April last year when ZiG was introduced. When ZiG was introduced, it had a projected stability. Which was then revised, I think, as you know, by about 43% in October last year. That revision meant it had to discover its true value. Now, when you define inflation, you're relatively looking at the loss of value of money vis-a-vis against prices or commodities, and what is the money chasing in terms of services and products that we've got in the market. Personally, I don't think you could not scientifically come up with year-on-year inflation on a new currency. You needed a cumulative period of at least 12 months to then say this is my true value. Now, if you look at the differences that you've got on year-to-year inflation and month-to-month inflation, the month-to-month inflation is more realistic, because it's now pegging what is there in the market. Yeah. So when we compare inflation, what it was last year and what it is now, you're not comparing like with like. So whilst those figures, yes, might seem alarming, I think on the ground they are not what they are. So to take you back, RBZ at some stage tried to blend ZiG inflation or local currency inflation with USD inflation. Again, you were mixing things that were not the same, right? Inflation, it has to be calculated on a unique currency basis. So for me, it's a bit too early for year-on-year inflation for us to say that's what it is. But for month-on-month inflation, which is now very pleasing figures, I think it's more realistic. So there's no need for panic in the market at the moment.
Awesome. Well, I think that's reassuring when you say there's no need for panic in the market. Now, moving on to my next question. What does this sharp rise in inflation, particularly driven by food and non-alcoholic beverages, mean for small and upcoming businesses that rely on fast-moving consumer goods?
Oh, yeah, a very good question, which needs, I think, adequate analysis. If you look at upcoming or startups, even big conglomerates, if you look at them, inflation, when you look at it, you have to segment it. There's food inflation, beverages inflation, household. No, there are various sectors that you look at. So what we are saying is, as the situation dramatically changed to the extent that you now need to reconfigure and reprice and revisit your pricing models in business, for me, no, it has not dramatically changed. What has happened is let me look at it from a layman's term. You look at what was the price of bread last year.
Okay.
If we say just for argument's sake, it was $1. And then we say now, what is now the price of bread? Relatively, what has been the percentage increase? All right. So it's important for business to plan and to really be sure of their pricing models. What we have heard, particularly in the retail sector in Zimbabwe, are pricing models that have been based on speculation.
Okay.
All right. We need pricing models that are market driven. Okay. You look at your supply chain. You say, if I'm selling a particular commodity in my supermarket, how did it originate? You now look at the whole value chain and say, what is the pricing models? Now, for the upcoming and small businesses, I don't think there's a big difference. Because if you look at it now, we also need to understand that about now, 75 to 80% of transactions in our economy are in US dollars.
Indeed. Yeah.
All right? And just the balance now is in ZiG. And if you look at just Harare as an example, the small upcoming boutiques, the proliferation of small businesses, and you look at their currency of trade, most of them, over 90% of them, are trading in US dollars.
Okay.
Now we look and we are analyzing those inflation figures. We are now saying what has dramatically changed. No, nothing has dramatically changed. What is now needed is for the RBZ to maintain a tight monetary policy as a regime, probably until August or September thereabouts. Right. Then we can let the market go loose. At the moment, you need to control the market. So for businesses, I would say it should be business as usual. But please, my appeal to businesses is to ensure that we have scientifically, mathematically approved pricing models, not speculative pricing models.
All right. Well, I think you raised an important issue here where you say usually prices are based on speculation. I think when we come back in the second segment, I just want to talk a bit about that. As to us to understand why the economy tries or it does its pricing based on speculation rather than on the market prices. So I think we'll look at that when we get in the second segment. Thank you very much, viewers, for joining us for the first segment of Your Wealth. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back to the second segment of Your Wealth. I'm joined by Dr. Zach Murera, who is helping us to unpack the inflation that has grown in Zimbabwe in regards to the ZiG, and also just to understand how this affects the day-to-day running for an average Zimbabwean, also the person who's running a small business. Now, I was just talking about the issue about speculation. Do you think there's something that can be done in order for, the market not to actually, base their prices on speculation?
Right. There are a number of factors that actually have taken us to where we are. Okay. First of all, these are historical experiences that we have gone through, and where people were not so sure in terms of the stability of currencies that we have been using. Okay. And for those who were pricing their goods and services in foreign currency, they then look at the market dynamics. It all, at the end of the day, centered, and it still centers around availability of foreign currency. Because for most who are in the retail sector, who are in the manufacturing sector, they are purchasing their inputs or their raw materials in US dollars. And then sometimes we'd say, no, look, let's have a confidence in our local currency, ZiG. Then we say, let me trade in ZiG. There is, and there has been, an exchange loss in terms of the profits because of the loss that you would then have had. And that has affected confidence in ZiG. Now, for those that have continued to trade in US dollars, RBZ had done the correct thing where they said, no, look, we'll allow you a certain margin on the cost of procurement, of purchasing your foreign currency. And that should act as a guideline on how you price your commodities. I always give the example, Phil, of fuel. all right? You have so many service stations. Whilst you've got a broad parameter in terms of availability, you now have marginal differences in terms of prices, pump prices that you've got at various fuel stations. That's the sort of competitive environment we need in our economy. So that when you walk into a supermarket, I think bread is a good example, $10, $20. The moment it goes to $30, there's consumer resistance, all right?
Indeed, yeah.
But we have a lot of other other services and other products, perfumes, for example, lotions. You then find out that, no, they are really, really overpriced. So we don't want a market where you've got price controls. That's very old-fashioned now in modern economics. You want your market to ultimately determine the appropriate prices. So my message to those people out there, where they are running a small business, where they are running a medium-sized business or a big business, just consider the plight of the consumer. And your pricing models must really be sustainable, because at the end of the day, you'll be in a competing market.
Oh, indeed, and that's profound. Thank you very much for elaborating on that. Now, moving on to my next question. Now, Zimstat reports that 0.0% weighted month-on-month inflation rate in May 2025. Now, is this a sign of reduced money circulation or declining consumer spending power? I just want you to explain on that.
Yeah, all right. If you look at our economy, it's quite funny. All right. At the moment, at a time where you think there's a decline in consumer purchasing power, no, that's not the case.
That's not the case.
We now have what I've come to term mass marketing.
Okay.
You find it in the informal sector. You find it at Mbare Msika. You find it at CSOs. Mass marketing of products and services. You find it in the city center. In terms of aggregate demand in the economy, it remains very good. Aggregate demand in our economy is very good. What is wrong in our economy? Whilst you have, let's say, let me give the example of retail sector, competing amongst themselves, all right? They are ridden by uncertainty, all right? And we are looking here, and your question was, is this a sign that people are having confidence in the currency?
Yeah.
I would say yes.
All right.
People have adopted a wait and see attitude.
Okay.
That they want to discover the true value of ZIG. But it has already been discovered. If you go into Combis, they now have what they call an equivalent, and they are accepting ZIG. Right?
Yes.
And what has been happening now is people have been saying, no, look, why don't you print more notes? Let's have more ZIG supply in the market. That can also be very, very dangerous, because what you want to do is to keep your money and in totality your money supply, which the RBZ has been able to do in control, so that you control your speculative behavior. You also control the exchange rate. Phil, it's a long conversation, but the exchange rate has been very, very, very ideal. I think the first quarter of the year, we almost discovered, although it's impossible, where you have a nexus, a mixed, a convergence of the black market rate and the official rate. Yeah, but now we are beginning to see that gap again widening, because there are so many other market forces at play.
No, interesting. Now, what could this mean for demand and business performance across sectors?
Yeah, so I believe if you look at, as I said, aggregate demand in our economy is good. If you look at economic activities, you just need to move around the city center. There is a hive of economic activities. Consumer spending is very ideal, but government needs to come in here, provide the ideal framework, and ensure that there is those, the major players, those who are having, the players who have got command heights in the economy, are pricing their goods and services correctly. That way, once you control your inflation, especially once the zig on zig, the year-on-year inflation comes to an ideal level. At the moment, there's panic that is 90%. But I believe if you look at the month-on-month, it's more realistic. And given more a longer time span of 12 to 24 months, you will then find out it will come down. So once you instill that, you instill confidence. which is what we have been seeking, that we need people to have confidence in the market. And once they have to have confidence in the market, the money in circulation, the money that is available, is then banked. It then goes into the formal sector. That way, your economy will begin to tick.
Oh, well, thank you very much for that. Now, with the, I think when we come back in the final segment, I just want to touch a bit about the projection which was made that the economy is going to grow by 6% in 2025. We are now in June, and I would really want to get your expertise on where we are. Is this possible? Will we be able to attain this? So I think when we come back in the third segment, we'll dwell much on this one. Well, thank you very much, viewers, for joining us for the second segment of Your Wealth. Do stand by. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back to the final segment of Your Wealth. I'm joined by Dr. Zach Murerwa, who's helping us to unpack the inflation trends that are currently happening in Zimbabwe's currencies. And we're just having a quite interesting conversation. And right now, we just want to delve much on the issue to do with the projected growth of the economy, Dr. Murerwa, which I believe a lot of people were really interested on, when the government, or rather when it was said that the economy was going to grow by 6% in 2025. Now, with the current inflation trends, are we still on track to meet this target, or inflation pressures there's inflation pressures undermining the growth momentum?
Yeah, I think we need to understand that last year, when the Minister of Finance presented this national budget, he projected a growth rate 5 to 6%, which is in tandem with the NDS1 blueprint. When you talk about an economy, you want to ask yourself, I think, let me put it in layman terms, is the economy growing? Right. Is Zimbabwean economy growing? Yes, it is. If you look at last year, this economy was really affected by the drought. Okay, and that meant rechanneling of resources for infrastructure, for other activities towards food self-sufficiency. And agriculture plays a pivotal role. Given the scenario that we are beginning to see and what is happening with our harvest, agriculture is likely to grow. And it is very key because it forms inputs, the basis of inputs for other industries, the downstream industries. And I think if you look at sub-Saharan Africa, if you look at World Bank, IMF statistics, average growth rate is about 4.3, 4.4% in sub-Saharan Africa. If you look at other economies that are almost like our size, your Uganda, your Kenya, they are growing by an average of 4.3, 4.4%. I'm saying this so that viewers understand what it seems to be the standard in other countries. If you look at South Africa, the growth rate is far much smaller, but it's a percentage of a bigger economy. All right. So in quantitative terms, it's then very huge. Yes, it will grow. World Bank and IMF have predicted that it will be slightly below 5%. But we are in a growth mode. We are in a growth trajectory. The economy will grow. But for it to grow, I think business must actually be understood in terms of what they need. Infrastructure, the supportive measures, electricity, water, for all other activities to go to a normal situation. If I give you the example of power as an example, where business has to resort to other alternative forms of power, sometimes generators, which are now very expensive. This pushes up prices, and then we have this inflation that we are talking about. And then we don't have optimum production. So if you look at the mining industry, agricultural industry, tourism, distribution, commerce, these are growing sectors. And I project, whilst we're halfway through the year, I think we'll end up on a growth trajectory of about, on a growth rate of about 4.5% by end of the year.
Which is not bad, actually.
Which is not bad compared to the regional standards that I've just alluded to.
Okay, no, that's fine. Now, for formal businesses, when we're talking of high inflation, what challenges does this pose in terms of operational costs, long-term planning, and accessing capital? How can they remain competitive while maintaining price stability for consumers?
You know, businesses, they do what we term due diligence. And you have to get your formula correct. You have to have the necessary confidence. You have to have the correct parameters in terms of running your businesses. A long-term planning in an economy which has gone through various episodes, which has been battered left, right, and center, including external things, such as sanctions and so on and so forth. You cannot have long-term planning. All right, that would then be ideal. What is needed, and I think, are the interventions that have been taken place to really sustain them, so that we have a robust performing economy, and then only you can talk about long-term planning. For now, it's just some of the most of the businesses are in the survival mode. Okay. And those that are doing well, unfortunately, they've developed a culture of profiteering, okay, where they say, I'm doing well, then you put your margins really up because you're taking advantage of that opportunity that is there. And then for the small scale, the informal sector, the small scale industries, they are now, contributing about 68 to 70% of GDP. Yeah. All right? They can't do long-term planning. Right. They look at what is there, what are the regulatory requirements, municipal licenses, wages, salaries, and recently we've had the requirements from Zimra in terms of point of sale machines. All these now, they try and say, what is the survival? For me, I would say we need to gradually take our business and our economy from a survival mode to a strategic planning mode, and that is sustainable, then our economy can really grow.
All right, thank you very much for that. Now, how does these inflation figures impact public and business confidence in the ZiG? Are there signs of a shift preference, back to the USD?
A very difficult question and very realistic, unfortunately, very realistic. Probably, put in other words, what is the average person now preferring in terms of currency of trade as choice? What is the preference of government? What is the preference of business? All right? Now, if you look at the ordinary man in the street, if you go Kumushai and you go the average in the sole trader, in the small shops, they are predominantly trading in US dollars. Even if you hire labor, they charge you in US dollars. But as you move towards the urban areas, we now, and I remember the governor saying, now we want to, until we reach 2030, to increase usage of ZiG. And you can only do that by bringing in confidence. So, in terms of your question, if people see that this is a better currency, a more stable currency, they tend to have a choice in trading in that currency. Let's not talk about how do I trade in US dollars, how do I trade in ZiG. We are saying, let's just look at stabilizing our own currency. And I think government has to start and walk the talk, where your licenses, your certain fees, prescribed fees, and other statutory payments should predominantly be charged in ZiG. Right? And that way you create a demand for ZiG. And when you create a demand for ZiG, people will then prefer it. And they are rational beings. Okay, the small scale operators, the informal traders, the big companies, they all make rational decisions. And when that happens, people will choose whichever is a stable currency. But for me, there is no economy in this world which succeeds without having its own currency.
Its own currency.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Doc, for coming through and, giving us, this analysis so that at least we can get to know where we are heading as a nation in regards to our economy. Thank you so much for outlining and, unpacking all these questions that I believe our viewers had and wanted to know as they make decisions in regards to a business. So thank you very much for joining us right here on Your Wealth.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much, viewers, for joining us right here on Your Wealth. My name is Kudzafiu Muchenjukwa. See you next week.